Welcome to Annotation Codex. I'm Amy Cheek, sharing with you my margin notes on philosophy, occultism, religion, literature, poetry, and politics. Today's article is called Kierkegaard and the Seven of Cups, Chimeric Potential and Indolence in the Present Age. Let's begin. Introduction. I'd like to begin this philosophical exploration of occult divinatory imagery with a candid disclaimer. I'm well aware Kierkegaard would hate this. However, I've never been one to let the ire of a centuries-dead Dane radiating at me from the spirit realm get in my way, and I'm not about to start now. Tarot, like poetry, is a way to better understand the self or the world in general through interpretive contemplation, and readers use the cards in a variety of different ways. Some see the cards as a way to pull messages from the other world, believing in a connection to spirits, deities, ancestors, or other entities, while more agnostic readers use the cards to psychologically process their experiences or explore their own thoughts and values sans spiritual or divine intervention. The Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot Deck, published in 1909 by William Rider & Son, is an Order of the Golden Dawn project by artist Pamela Colman Smith and poet Arthur Edward Waite, and is the tarot deck with the most well-known and enduring imagery. Smith and Waite diverged from the traditional Tarot de Marseille by packing the cards full of meaning in elaborate visual compositions of literary, theological, and occult symbolism, rather than merely using pips to represent the numbers 1 through 10 in the minor arcana. For the purposes of this podcast, I would encourage you to Google a picture of the Seven of Cups from the Tarot de Marseille, and the Seven of Cups from the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. If you're unable to do that, I'll do my best now to describe them. In the older Tarot de Marseille, which was published in 1709 by French artist Pierre Madinier, there are 3 rows of cups, 3 at the top, 1 in the middle, and 3 at the bottom, for a total of 7 cups. They're on a white background, and sort of curled around the center cup is this floral pattern, sort of forming like a parenthesis around that center cup. The cups are gold, filled with a red liquid, and they're just sort of in these tidy rows. In the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot, I want you to picture a blue expanse as the background, with a cloud cutting through the center, and sort of staggered on this cloud are 2 rows of cups. There's 3 at the top, 4 at the bottom. One cup has a person's head. Another has a shrouded figure glowing in red. Another has a snake. Then across the bottom row, there's a castle in one of the cups. Then the next cup is full of jewels. The next is containing one of those traditional laurel wreaths. And the last is containing a blue dragon. Then in the foreground of the picture, you see this figure with their back turned to the audience, and they're sort of just silhouetted in black, and they just seem to be looking at the cups. So the traditional Tarot de Marseille image is a lot more sort of tidy and straightforward, whereas the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot has a lot more symbolism to interpret, so we'll get into that right now. In the Marseille tarot, the main avenues of interpretation would be 1. Cups representing the element of water, symbolizing the emotional life. 2. Whether the cups appear right side up or reversed in the reading. 3. The numerology of the number 7. And 4. What the positions of the cups might situationally represent for the querent. However, the Seven of Cups in the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot is far more detailed. Not only does it provide the same avenues of interpretation as the Marseille tarot, but it also provides 5, the interpretive variety of all the different symbols in each of the cups, 6, a silhouetted figure in the foreground, and 7, a cloud positioned in the vertical center of a blue expanse. Regardless of what one interprets the objects in each cup to mean, the overall narrative of the Rider-Waite-Smith image is one of distraction and indecision. The figure in the foreground must make a choice. 7 options are being presented, whose risks and rewards must be individually and comparatively assessed. The Seven of Cups is definitely one of the more abstract and whimsical compositions in the minor arcana, not depicting the figure in a literal physical or social situation, but rather in a situation of interiority. The only other minor arcana that are equally as abstract, but far less whimsical, are the Three of Swords and the Eight of Wands, depicting sorrow and fast travel, respectively. The Christian existentialist philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, in his essay The Present Age, laments the burden of ruminative indecision and its effect on the individual's ability to take action, while also exploring the concept of inwardness as a kind of values-driven, faith-based interiority that should motivate rather than stall meaningful external action. While Kierkegaard has no associations whatsoever to the practice of tarot reading, as someone who does, I was struck while reading his essay how aptly his description of the present age, which he calls at different points an age of reflection and an age of indolence, is captured by the imagery of the Seven of Cups. For anyone who reads tarot, or for anyone who wants to deeply understand both the nature and the way out of the mire of indecisive reflection, look no further than Kierkegaard's The Present Age. Chimeric potential and indolence. Based on the monster from Greek mythology, which was a confusing amalgamation of a lion, a goat, and a dragon, a chimera is a thing that is hoped or wished for, but in fact is illusory or impossible to achieve. The Seven of Cups, which the Rider-Waite-Smith guidebook describes as depicting, quote, strange chalices of vision, embodies the archetype of the chimera with its otherworldly presentation of seven chalices, full of potential, upon a cloud. In her book Holistic Tarot, Benabel Wen interprets the sundry objects in the cups as follows. Quote, the attractive head is said to represent romance or lust. The covered figure glowing red is ominous, showing anger, resentment, or vengeance. The snake shows unrestrained ambition, pursuing goals for the wrong reasons. The castle and jewels represent material temptations. The laurel wreath, glory for the sake of glory. And the dragon, as depicted in this card, represents the dark and sinister. It is also said that the seven cups symbolize the seven sins or temptations: lust, rage, gluttony, pride, greed, envy, and sloth. True clarity of vision is presently clouded, and the seeker is obstructed from seeing what he or she really wants as a result of the tempting options. The options before the seeker, as indicated by this card, are superficial: wealth, fame, sex. The Seven of Cups is a card associated with wishful thinking, mostly of tempting mirages that are not long-lasting, substantive, or meaningful. End quote. This card represents that the querent is dwelling in the realm of imagination, or as the Rider-Waite-Smith guidebook puts it, in the glass of contemplation, rather than in the realm of material action, and similarly to a sphinx's riddle or a trickster's challenge in a fairy tale, the querent cannot meaningfully proceed in their journey until they make some kind of decision here. Unfortunately, while all of the options look enticing, none of them are especially compelling. The posture of the figure in the foreground has their arm flung to the side, as if they are stunned that these choices materialized out of thin air. The figure seems taken aback. There is no indication on the card that the figure is leaning obviously towards choosing any one of these options over the others. In The Present Age, Kierkegaard describes the paralytic effect of deliberation. Quote, the individual does not stand freely and confidently on the pedestal of a conscious act, but is surrounded by a host of deliberations before and after that render him incapable of getting his eye on the action. One cannot live a life of action unless decisions are actually made, and while it is wise to consider one's options thoughtfully before charging ahead, Kierkegaard laments that in his own time, most people will use excessive prudence as an excuse for inaction. Choices are not often black and white, not often easy, and there is such a fear of standing out and looking foolish that his generation has become risk-averse. He wonders if, quote, there is a person anymore who ever makes just one big stupid blunder, and darkly posits that, quote, Not even a suicide these days does away with himself in desperation, but deliberates on the step so long and so sensibly that he is strangled by calculation. Questioning, quote, whether or not he can really be called a suicide, inasmuch as it was in fact the deliberating that took his life. He compares dwelling in indecision to sitting in a room with no ventilation. Eventually the air will become toxic. The state of indecision is not meant for long-term residence. His analysis of the present age and its overall refusal to commit to meaningful action is a stark contrast to his description of the revolutionary age, which he characterizes in the prior chapter as passionate and therefore inherently obligated to make decisions with immediacy. The decisions of the revolutionary age, informed as they are by worthy and unifying ideas, are transformative and lasting, but the decisions of the present age, lacking substantial commitment to any unifying ideas, are merely described as flares or flashes of enthusiasm which do not disrupt, do not last, and make no dent in the drone of the status quo. He notes, quote, "An age exhausted by a flash of enthusiasm will relax all the more readily in indolence." Without commitment to sustaining principles, the present age is easily tired. The sense of futility is also captured in the Rider-Waite-Smith explanation of the Seven of Cups, which says, quote, "Nothing permanent or substantial is suggested" by any of the options floating in the chalices before the figure. In my notes, I organized Kierkegaard's 3 characterizations of people or societies based on how well they unite their inwardness. Think of inwardness as a motivating interior form or ideas or values with their external action, what I'm calling unifying exterior content. He calls these 3 types crudes, herd conformists, and passionates. Passionates are the idealized version of the revolutionary age, which can enact disruptive change for the better based on common values without falling to chaos. Herd conformists are the failed version of a revolutionary age, as they can unify on exterior action, but do not have the inwardness to ground themselves in harmonious values or principles of any kind. Crudes are consistent with Kierkegaard's view of the present age. Not only do they not do anything, but they also can't even seem to take any internal value seriously enough to allow it to motivate them. So to break down these 3 types, let's start with the crudes. The crudes have no unifying exterior content, right? No outward action. And they have no motivating interior form. No ideas or values that are driving them. A group of crudes he calls a drone, and 3 features he identifies for the drone are crudeness, futility, and commotion. Think of people talking without really saying anything. The second category, the herd conformist, they do have unifying exterior content, but they still do not have any motivating interior form. He calls a group of herd conformists cacophony, and 3 features that belong to this group are violence, anarchy, and riotousness. The last group is called the passionate. They do have unifying exterior content, which means they do take action. And they do have motivating interior form. They have an internal value that's driving them that justifies the action. A group of passionates he describes as a symphony, and the 3 features of a symphony are optimum, normativity, and modesty or nuance. If you don't mind getting a little political, current political figures that would fit the archetype of crudes, where they are not taking action and they are not driven by internal values. Think of Hakeem Jeffries or Chuck Schumer, who are in these positions of relative power in the Democratic Party, but are not meaningfully fighting or resisting fascism the way that we need them to. For a picture of herd conformists, look no further than the insurrection on January 6th. MAGA as a movement we could describe as that cacophony, that group of herd conformists, where they can take action together, but they sort of just externally carry each other along, and they don't really have the values to justify what they're doing. For an example of somebody who might be considered a passionate, I think about Zoran Mamdani, who is very, very clear on his intentions, his inward values, and he takes actions that match what those values are. While the crudes of Kierkegaard's present age are missing both action and inwardness, Kierkegaard prioritizes the cultivation of inwardness, which requires individuals to reveal through risk-taking what their most prized values actually are. Quote, "Not until the single individual has established an ethical stance despite the whole world, not until then can there be any question of genuinely uniting. Once that inwardness is established, decisive action that unites individuals can follow. Perhaps counterintuitively, that inwardness is not established merely by thinking about it." The need to commit. Unsurprisingly for a philosopher whose Christian theology is central to his work, Kierkegaard recommends the leap of faith as a remedy for the trap of overthinking and inaction in which the present age has ensnared itself. Quote, "Even if it is a rash leap, if only it is decisive, and if you have the makings of a man, the danger and life-severe judgment upon your recklessness will help you to become one." Kierkegaard pushes towards making a decision and acting upon it, even if, or maybe especially if, you lack certainty of security or a positive outcome. Even if it is the aforementioned one big stupid blunder, at least you'll learn from it, allowing the experience to shape you in some way. Unlike sitting and thinking, making a blunder is at least evidence that you have lived. Essential to the Seven of Cups is the fact that the options in the chalices are merely mirages, or superficial promises of only temporary satisfaction. The possibilities we tend to ruminate on distractedly in place of taking action are not worth the time and effort we spend on them in excess in the name of prudence. The application of Kierkegaard's leap of faith is not to aim for any of the cups, but for the blue expanse beyond them. Imagine yourself leaping through the cloud of distractions and into something eternal. Quote, "Reflection is a snare in which one is trapped, but in and through the inspired leap of religiousness, the situation changes, and it is the snare that catapults one into the embrace of the eternal. Through the leap out into the depths, one learns to help himself, learns to love all others as much as himself." For Kierkegaard, this embrace of the eternal is Christian faith, and we have to acknowledge that separating his philosophy from a Christian paradigm would be bastardizing his work. An agnostic worldview is, I'm sure, a form of the non-commitment that he expressly rails against. However, as close as one could get as an agnostic, who isn't quite sure what the divine is, but is open to the idea that something might be there, the next best thing to throwing yourself into the arms of God would be determining what your highest value really is. Not what you say it is, not what you think it should be, but what it is when it comes down to it, best revealed under pressure. Looking at your situation clearly and aligning yourself in all of your action to that highest value, in spite of discomfort and in spite of the feeling of not being in control. Out of respect, I could never completely atheize Kierkegaard's knight of faith archetype and say it still works just fine, but there must be something like it, where an atheist or agnostic could pursue a convicted, committed loyalty to their highest value or virtue. When the Seven of Cups comes up in your reading, and the existential dread sets in, and the overwhelm of choice closes in around you, and the distractions of only fleeting pleasures crowd your conscience, you need only to ask yourself, what would Søren Kierkegaard say? Answer? Deliberate, but with immediacy. Don't stay there long. Look, everything is ready. Look, the cruelty of abstraction exposes the vanity of the finite in itself. Look, the abyss of the infinite is opening up. Look, the sharp scythe of leveling permits all, every one, to leap over the blade. Look, God is waiting. Leap then into the embrace of God. Postscript. What cards would Kierkegaard like? Option 1, the Knight of Wands. Initially, I gravitated to this card specifically over Kierkegaard's Knight of Faith archetype. Knights in the tarot move quickly and on a set path, not easily deterred. This archetype suits Kierkegaard's admiration for the revolutionary age. The Knight of Wands is loyal to his passion, wands being the element of fire, and he is making moves. When the Knight of Wands comes up in a reading, quote, "The seeker is an extrovert and a visionary, highly motivated, creative, dynamic, individualistic, and often demonstrates an irrepressible enthusiasm and vitality." That's from Benabel Wen. Enthusiasm is an important word for Kierkegaard, and he even has a recipe for inspired, enthusiastic action in the present age. Start with inspired deliberation, which is a special kind of deliberation imbued with immediacy, a force which obligates you to make a decision. Then confront prudence. Then reject prudence, and have fun doing your enthusiastic action, which should decidedly not be the careful or sensible thing. The Knight of Wands is indeed inspired and decisive, but not the picture of caution, and therefore a natural fit for Kierkegaard's revolutionary. Option 2, the Magician. Kierkegaard's empowered embrace of the divine that enables meaningful action is best captured in The Magician. Benabel Wen describes it as follows, quote, "The infinity symbol represents spiritual enlightenment. The magician is humanity at its best, executing divine motives. The magician represents the prophetic theological concept of unity, or the alliance of reason and faith. The magician upright suggests someone with incredible power and force, advancing forward in a single direction in constant motion." The magician points both up and down, committed to both divine values and earthly action. I especially think Kierkegaard would appreciate the sense of being exceptional that is inherent to this card. Kierkegaard spends a lot of time criticizing the cultural phenomenon of leveling, in which no one wants to stand out, and as a result, individuals in a society get lulled into the same level of mediocrity. Everyone remains on par with one another, and begins to form this amorphous mass called the public. In contrast to an individual who resigns to leveling, the magician, committed to their craft and uncommon knowledge, becomes outstanding. Wen goes on to say, quote, "Tertius Thorn Mooney interprets the magician as expressing the will that creates the prodigy. All that time the seeker devotes to his or her work is time away from sharing in mundane joys with normal society, and thus the seeker is a prodigy at the expense of normalcy." The magician is an empowered, active card that challenges the querent to bring the divine down to earth, and to elevate the earthly towards the divine, and says that we have everything we need here to do so. I'd like to acknowledge Benabel Wen, who is the author of I Ching the Oracle, The Tao of Craft, and Holistic Tarot, and the creator and illustrator of the Spirit Keeper's Tarot. Also, thanks to Joe Foley of Unsolicited Advice, who led a reading group on the present age, and without whom I would not have prioritized reading this work. Be sure to subscribe to the Unsolicited Advice YouTube channel and Substack. And of course, if you have not yet subscribed to my Substack, please do so. Thanks so much.